The big book is the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. Can one get by with only the big book as far as literature is concerned, or is other text needed or required?
Well, the big book is the gospel. That's the big book is the story of how the first members of Alcoholics Anonymous recovered, and so it really is the thing that sets the stage for all that we do in AA. So I think it's a vital document, and it sometimes we can get a little over carried away with it, and almost we almost idolize it. We make the Holy Grail out of it, and all it is a book telling about how the first members of AA stayed sober. That's all it is. It's not the great American novel or anything. It's a story of people telling their stories. And all we do now in our meetings, we repeat that, only we don't write it down. We just sort of tell it, So
Yeah, I think for me the big book, I obviously for years, for 4 years didn't have a big book, I guess, until 39, and then for a few years after that there wasn't a lot of literature. So it's pretty obvious, I think, a person can take the information in the big book, the first 164 pages, and get sober and stay sober. But what I found helpful is that, and I'm grateful for the 12 and 12 and the other conference-approved literature that expands on that, and ones that I found useful as AA Comes of Age, as well as the Language of the Heart. And we've got a lot of other good conference-approved literature beyond the big book that is helpful in finding solutions to not only sobriety, but sometimes to everyday living problems that can get me tangled up.
Yeah, I think one thing that sort of keeps the big book in perspective for me is it's the story of how the first members stayed sober. So it's not a learned journal on something. It's basically just reporting on how people stayed sober, and it's a wonderful tool. It's a wonderful tool to have. But I do think we almost deitize it sometimes. We ought to make it be like the Holy Grail, and the people that wrote it, I knew a couple of them, and the people that wrote it were wild as kangaroos. I mean, they always had fights, and I didn't know I was going to write a book. I mean, I wasn't there then, but I knew some of them, and they were a wild, woolly crowd. To come out with a book like that is it's a miracle in itself.
Well,
yeah.
Save me from veering from the questions, but just exactly how wild is a kangaroo?
He's pretty bad. He doesn't know how to run very well.
So if a concept is not in the big book, moving on, because we're not finished with the big book, that's going to come up in another question too. So, but if a concept is not in the big book, can it be shared in a meeting?
God, I would hope so. I sure hope so. I hope we don't get so bound in the book that we got to stay in the text.
And hopefully the concept is something that has to do with my experience. If I'm sharing it in a meeting and how it relates to recovery from alcoholism. And it says, and the question is, the other part of it is, what if it appears in another AA approved text?
And I think the thing is for me is, we were talking about religion a little bit between takes, and I grew up in a religion that is sola scriptura. If it's not in the Bible, you don't talk about it, and that was hard set in me. That if I can't find it in the text, I don't need to be talking about it. And I've been called a big book thumper a little bit by a few people here and there, and that's just that comforts me, I guess. With I like carrying the book around, I like reading it, and that's just the that I guess it's just my personal experience on it, and that's a hard habit to break in my mind. But the way that I've come to see it is, if the the way I stay sober, the way I've stayed sober is working the 12 steps of this program and doing the suggestions that are given to me by my sponsor and people that know more about what's going on than I do, which is pretty much everybody most of the time. Anything else that helps me stay sober, I think, is just gravy on it. I mean, it's just icing on the cake, and it's just another little bit of insurance I put into that pot to help protect me if the thought of a drink comes.
Well, I don't consider the book to be the Holy Grail. You know that it's a great tool, but that's all it is. You know that it wasn't. It really isn't the Holy Grail. It's just it was a group of alcoholics got together, and they basically just told their stories. You know, and then they put it together, and then Bill put the elocution to it, you know, so that it would read well. But it's a vital tool, but sometimes we get obsessed with stuff, you know, and we got people that are writing their own versions of the big book. You know, they got publishing them and all this kind of stuff that I think it's easy to get a little carried away with it. But it's just like school. You go to college or whatever. You know that you got materials that you use, but you got to work your fanny off to get through. You know, and I think the same thing with the book. You know that. I know a lot of people that just live and die with that book. You know, and won't go anywhere without it. Carrying everywhere to go. But you know, it's a book. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think it'd be safe to say, I guess one analogy would be that it's kind of like a road map. It's nice to have a road map if I'm going to California, but a road map won't get me there until I get off my butt, get in the car, and get it ready, and put some action behind
Oh,
it.
you bet. Well, if you looked at the crew who wrote that book, I mean, that was a motley crew. I mean, you had people in there that had been sober 2 weeks or something, you know. Now, these weren't all really fine warriors that were highly experienced. It was a group of alcoholics, so, but we turned that into the Holy Grail. That's kind of making a quantum leap. You know, and I don't mean to demean the book, because it's vital. I use it, you know, but that's what it is, a book. And it's just some people put it together, and there weren't any real writers in there. Bill was the closest thing to a writer in there. And
writer he was.
Oh, indeed. Indeed. Very much so.
Move on.